increase in compensation, but this isn't a full-time job for anybody, and nobody signs up to be on our council to get rich, right? And I mean, given the current state of the economy and the number of people that are out of work, I don't know that I feel like it's a great idea to go to the voters and ask them for a pay increase for our city council.
Okay. Other thoughts on that, Mike? Okay.
I guess my thought that while what Tio says is true, I don't think council members are doing it for the dollars that they're getting paid per month. However, it's not a couple hours a month type of a thing either. It is a lot of work reading the information and studying the information and making the decisions that are going to be best for the city. Well, I think it is fair compensation, and I also want to echo what Mr. Rothschild said as well, and have it tie in with the CPI. That's kind of my view.
Okay.
Mr. McGough?
Okay, Nancy Young, go ahead.
Thank you. I couldn't find my raise hand button, so the way I feel is that I think I kind of agree with T.O. under certain economic conditions like now. I think it just looks very bad for all the council members to put something like this on the ballot. I generally would agree with Ed Rothschild in terms of what makes the most sense. I'm wondering if perhaps we couldn't make that particular provision effective 3 years from now as a thought, because it's going to take a while for things to come back. There will be in the future other ups and downs in terms of the economy and all of that. But I kind of agree with T.O. that it doesn't make sense to put it to the voters right now to approve to start immediately, but rather have a delay in hopes of a better economy.
I actually really like Nancy's suggestion here, because that would finish out every single member of council's current term. So members of council would not be locked into anything on this ballot. I really like that 3-year delay specifically, because that takes us into an entirely new round of elections, whether the current members of council are reelected or not. That starts everything fresh from where we are right now.
Okay. Any other thoughts on that? Preston?
Sure, thank you. So I guess then my question, if we were to adopt option 3, is then how will we specify that amount, either now or in 3 years? Or conversely, if it might make sense for the simplicity of that to consider more of an option 2, to only take it forward once the 3-year period had elapsed.
So that would be leaving the compensation as it is, but making it subject to any CPI increase after a period of 3 years. Okay, Katie Winter?
Thanks, Mr. McGough. Refresh my memory. How much are members currently compensated? And then I'm just wondering, are they also compensated and then reimbursed for expenses?
Yes.
So,
or is it just
Katie,
one compensation?
Council members are paid $13,800. The mayor and the mayor pro tem make slightly more. I believe it's just shy of 15,000, like 14,600 or something like that. I don't know their exact salaries. And then we are reimbursed specific expenses such as mileage, and if we have like a travel or a conference thing that we do specifically on behalf of the city, if we choose to expense for it. So we have to, like, God knows I've never expensed a coffee. But I did expense some of my longer mile trips. So it kind of is done that way.
Can someone like tell me the exact amounts then?
Yeah,
Is that, I mean, just for the, go ahead.
Well, like I said, 13,800 is the council salary, and that's the exact amount. And then in terms of expenses, it's like, I don't remember, it's 50 cents a mile, something like that. But yeah, and then we're given an iPad, but like we don't charge our phones or our internets or anything like that.
Okay, I'm sorry. Is the mayor compensated differently than councilors?
The mayor and the mayor pro tem both make just shy of 15,000. I can't remember the exact
Okay.
amount. It's like 14,600, something like that. Maybe John or Mark McGough know the mayor and the mayor pro tem's exact salaries.
Yeah, I think the mayor is, my memory is that it's $1,500 a month, which would be a salary or a compensation of 18,000, where the council is at that 11,600 or 11,800, and the mayor pro tem like $100 a month more than that. So it ranges from 11,800 to it is 11,800 for council, a little more for the mayor pro tem, and 18,000 for the mayor.
Well, there you go.
So,
It's 11,800. I thought it was 13,800. So you see, there you go. I just give myself.
I'm sorry, did I say 11,800? I didn't mean to say 11. It's $1,150 a month is what it is. So it comes out to, I guess, 13,600 actually. So it's
And Mark, if I'm not mistaken, I think the mayor and mayor pro tem salary is actually 14,400 per annually, which is $1,200 a month. I think it's only a $50 per month bump to be the mayor or mayor pro tem over the council member.
okay, but whatever that exact amount is, we've got the range of what those are. So let me get a couple other people in here. I think Brett, you were next to speak. Go ahead, Brett.
Thank you, Mark. I agree with others who point out that we don't particularly want our city councilmen to be in this for the money, and they clearly aren't. The compensation can no way compensate them for the amount of work that they actually have to put in. I know my council member puts in an awful lot of time, and I know council member Marriott and Simpson do as well. I believe that option 2 would be the easiest one to support and the easiest one to explain. It simply makes sense to tie it to some kind of index, and it takes the any awkwardness away from city council to try and adjust their own salaries. My 2 cents.
Okay. And Bob Dyer.
Thanks, Mark. And I saw that Rachel put in the correct amounts because if it hasn't changed since 2007, then I remember it was 1150 and Mayor Pro Tem got an extra 100 and the mayor was 1,500 a month. Yeah, there's no question that nobody runs for council for the salary. And in a slow week, it might be 20 hours. And depending on how active and busy you are, it could be a full-time job for a week or two in any given month. So it's less than minimum wage. And I don't even want to get into the discussion of what should minimum wage be.
Yeah.
But I think option 3 to me would make sense. I'm a little nervous about setting an actual salary in a charter, you know, of any sort. But it, to me, if you set an amount and you said it would become effective January 1st, 2025, then that gives you that more than 3 years, and then you go from there, or December 1st, because that would be the new council essentially of 2024. But I guess my one reservation would be to set any particular amount in the city charter. That does make me a little nervous, but on the other hand, if you don't, then the city council can set it wherever they want. So I guess, you got to take your choices, but I guess I would support 3 with the provision that you set it way out in advance. It's 3 years minimum.
And you will note that only one charter specifies the amount of compensation. That's Boulder's charter, and their compensation is $100 per meeting. So it's, and they've had that in there for quite a few years. Ken Feldman.
I agree with Mr. Dyer.
Okay. And again, Brett, you had something else?
My apologies, I do not.
Oh, okay. There's still a hand up in the air there. So, okay. Well, any other comments on this? Maybe we can get kind of like a little straw poll or something, if you can, either raise a hand or show a hand there as to for the options, and we'll just see what it looks like to start with. If you just say, how many would be in favor of option 1, which is just leaving it as it is to council to resolve by ordinance?
Excuse me, Mark.
Yes, go ahead.
Lisa would like to go ahead and put up a poll for us in the chat. She'll put a link there, and then you guys can use that. We'll just give it a try and see how that works.
That sounds good to me.
Okay, great. Thank you, Lisa.
Yeah, this is my first attempt. So just click on that link and you should be able to select it. Just give me a thumbs up if it worked, and hopefully we can kind of, it did? Okay, cool.
Wait, we have 4 options?
Yeah, there are 4 options listed there. So let's just get a kind of a straw poll here and see. Okay, are people able to do that?
All right, well, but Mark, can you, I'm sorry, I must be dense because I see option 1, 2, 3, and 4, but I don't see what they are.
Option 1 is no change. Compensation continues to be prescribed by ordinance.
Okay, option 4 would be then the 2025 set an amount and then CPI after that?
No, I think option 3 is the one that Bob Dyer stated and the one you said you agreed with.
Oh, yeah, you're right. You're right. Sorry, was not reading that. My bad.
Okay, has everybody had a chance to indicate?
No, give me a minute.
Right now we're coming in at 53% for option 3, 37% for option 2, and 11% for option 1.
Okay, so it's, okay. Would you feel comfortable if we go ahead and just refer it to the council to say we're most in favor of option 3? And of course, council has final decision on it, but we would say to them, specify an amount of compensation for the council and mayor effective on a given future date, and then permit adjustments according to the CPI. Are people okay with that one?
Yeah.
Okay, let's refer option 3 to the council and see what they wish to do with it. And it had been suggested that it might take place in December of 2024, which would give it 3 years. So we would have 2 council elections between now and then, and that should work out well. Okay, thank you. And what's the next issue? Well, I guess we've got, that's the time frame for and procedure for replacement of a council member vacancy and appointment of the mayor. Okay, and basically, all that the council is asking for is to increase the time to fill a vacancy from 30 to 45 days. As the narrative indicates, there is no requirement in charter at present that the vacancy be advertised that applications might be taken or that interviews, a deliberative process. There is no requirement for that, but the city has chosen in the last 2 vacancies at least to do that in each of the cases, to say, yes, let's advertise it, let's take applications, let's talk with people, let's determine who are the candidates who are best qualified, and then have a vote. And so the 45 days would allow more time for that. I can tell you in the last vacancy, when I was sitting on the council, the vacancy happened in December. And given the holidays, the holiday season, et cetera, it put a real bind on the council to get things done within the required time. And 45 days does not seem, at least to the council or to me, to be excessive, but would allow for just a more comfortable process to make sure that we're still able to do the interviewing, the announcing and the interviewing, et cetera. So anyway, thoughts on extending the time for 15 days?
I completely support this. I think it's a great idea to give more time to find the best candidates, to solicit from the public, to get it published and all the different things. So we've made do as a council with members absent before for various reasons. I see no problem whatsoever with adding those extra 2 weeks in order to be able to find the right person to fill a seat.
Okay. And John Marriott.
Yes, I'll just add a little context, much along what Mr. McGough said. I was on council. In fact, I was newly elected to council the last time we had a vacancy. And it was a little unlucky that the vacancy happened right at the 1st of December. But coming together as a council and deciding on a procedure by which to appoint a new council member was difficult because of the time frame. And I think we did the best we could with that. We also got sued over it and lost part of that lawsuit because of it, and not because we did anything intentional, but because you know, a different interpretation. But it's really one of those things that 30 days seems like a lot of time, but it is not. If you're going to try to have a deliberative process where you advertise the vacancy, invite people to apply, and then use some kind of process to select or conduct interviews, even though the official action is council appointing a replacement. I think I would strongly recommend that we favor this because I think it would help avoid what was an actual difficult situation in the past.
Okay. Ed Rothschild.
Yeah, I support the extending the time. I was going to ask a question out of ignorance from this esteemed group, which was, in the existing language, it talks about replacing the mayor with a council person. Why wouldn't it just be the mayor pro tem?
Could we hold that one just for a minute? And I'll come back to that. But at this point, if we could just kind of come to a resolution about extending the 30 days from 30 days to 45 days.
Certainly.
Okay,
I can
thanks.
drop the poll in there for you, Mark, for that question.
Okay.
All right.
Let's hear from Preston again.
Sure, just maybe a clarification. So I think, be in favor of the additional time, if not even more time perhaps. But I guess the question would be, what would be also the reason of not inserting some of the process that we're talking about? It was conducted so that it is more certain.
There's always the difficulty, of course, if you get into the process and put it into the charter, because for whatever reason, there may be a need to vary a process or whatever. So process within a charter, I have not seen that in other charters, and just from my perspective, I would be hesitant to identify a process in the charter. But others may feel different from that. Okay, let's just deal with this one if we can. Lisa says she's got the, what do you call
Yep,
it?
the poll is in the chat box, Mark. So if you guys want to knock it out.
Okay, if I can get to that.
Hey, Mark, did we address Shelley's
Yeah.
question in the chat about the timing? Shelley, I don't want to speak to your friendly amendment. Is that relevant here?
I'm sorry, I didn't see, Shelley, you have an amendment?
Mark, I think Shelley was suggesting 2023, after elections in 2023, for the annual CPI-based increases of council salaries to occur.
Oh,
Okay,
got
so,
it.
and we've moved past that one for now, so. Okay, so we can take a look at, so we're just basically trying to consider, are you in favor of this extension from 30 to 45 days? So it's really a yes, no question here. So if you can indicate that.
Does anyone need more time? Or are we good?
I think we're good.
All right, looks like 100% said yes.
Okay, so that one's easy. So now let's go back to Ed Rothschild's question. And of course, that comes from the charter language, and I forget when that was adopted, but it says the mayor will be appointed from among the other council members. And Ed, let me ask you to just amplify on what your concern is.
It's not, it's a clarification. Why wouldn't that, instead of just selecting from amongst them, why wouldn't it not be the mayor pro tem taking the position of mayor?
A good question of why. Bob Dyer seems to have an answer.
Go for it, Bob.
Well, you might remember the last time I mentioned that I was the person who wrote up the change for the charter to have an elected mayor. Before that, it was from among the council members, and I suspect that we kind of forgot about that part. If we have a mayor pro tem, it probably should be the mayor pro tem that should step up and finish that term until there's the next election. So I'll claim responsibility for that oversight. But yes, I agree with Ed. It should be the mayor pro tem. That's the whole point of a mayor pro tem, is to fill in for the mayor when there is no mayor available.
Okay. Mr. Marriott.
Yeah, thank you. I would actually I would take a contrary position there, and only for this, my observation in my 2 terms on council has been we have moved the mayor pro tem position around, and it has not been kind of a competitive position that we try to compete for, and I see that as a good thing, because it's given opportunity for to spread that around, to learn more about it. And it also is functional in that there are several regional things we do that only the mayor or mayor pro tem can do. And so it makes that work. I think a permanent vacancy of the mayor, mayor leaving before their term is up, where the voters don't get to select the mayor, I think is very different than a mayor pro tem filling in for the mayor because the mayor is busy that day or on vacation or something like that. And so I would, I think the little nod to history, the way the mayor used to be selected, and from a practical matter, I think selecting a replacement mayor from the council is the right answer. And I think it's probably the right answer for the council members to select amongst themselves a replacement for the mayor if the mayor were to leave permanently. So I would argue to leave it the way it is. I don't see any logic whatsoever of making it the mayor pro tem automatically. And I fear that it might cause the mayor pro tem slot to then all of a sudden be a different position that gets competed for, which to me doesn't seem to be positive.
I agree entirely with my colleague. Thank you, John. You took the words right out of my mouth. I think the mayor pro tem is an excellent position for learning a little bit, for backstopping the mayorship. Every member of council theoretically gets a turn at it, and we kind of amicably take turns with it, at least how it was explained to me when I came on board last year. That's sort of how it goes. And so I think, especially given different circumstances of different times, if there were a vacancy in the mayor position, depending on the issues of the docket, a certain member of council might be best suited to lead. Whereas, if it was a different set of issues on the docket, a different member of council might be best suited to lead. So I agree entirely with John that I think the current system is set up nicely, and we shouldn't be messing with what's not broken.
It does bring to mind, and I'm not sure I should mention it, but I will. There was a time that the mayor pro tem position became very competitive. 33 ballots worth of competitiveness at a council meeting about 20 years ago. And Bob Dyer is smiling, and I'm sure Shelley can also smile at that one. But it was, that was the most competitive mayor pro tem contest that I've ever seen, probably the most competitive that there's been in the state history. But it finally was resolved on, I think it was 33 ballots, wasn't it, Bob?
It was, I know it was up, it was double digits. We didn't get to 3 digits, so it was some.
I think 33 is the right number. And for everybody else.
Oh, that's right, Bob.
The council picks the mayor pro tem on the first organizational meeting after the election. There's usually no major business that goes on. It's ceremonial. It gives an opportunity for the outgoing council members to say goodbye, for the new council members to say thank you. There's a little reception afterwards. It was so embarrassing to spend hours and 33 ballots trying to pick a mayor pro tem. I see Lorraine Anderson is on the Zoom meeting with us tonight, and I'm telling you, we all got together afterwards and said, what can we do to make sure this never happens again? And I'm proud of the councils that have gone subsequently, and it never has happened again. And I agree with what John Marriott and Lauren Simpson has said. It's a different issue if you're picking a new mayor to take the place of a mayor who's not just missing a meeting. So I like the way it works now. That was one of those, we learned our lesson, and I'm hoping that none of you will ever have to learn it again.
I would echo those comments as somebody that, yes, it was a competitive thing for just mayor pro tem where there was no vacancy, but I can picture various circumstances that could be going on in the community that a person who happened to have been picked as mayor pro tem a year before, it might not be the ideal person to deal with those issues facing the community, and leave it to the council to decide who that person would be. So I agree with leave it alone.
Mark?
Yes, go ahead, Nancy.
Basically, I agree with allowing the council to choose a new mayor. My concern is if there's a vacancy in the mayor's position, and let's say it's in the first year of his term, wouldn't it, that means for the next 3 years, the council will have a potential tie vote, only 6 members. Do we need to arrange for, under certain circumstances, the election of a new mayor?
No, it would not work that way. If there's still a vacancy on the council, if the vacancy is in the position of mayor, and somebody is selected to be the mayor, selected from among the council members, there is still a vacancy, which would then be filled through the process that we just talked about before, and the vacancy would only last until the next election. So if it happened in the first year of a mayor's term, somebody from the council would be elevated to that position, and the resulting vacancy, and that person would only serve until the next election. So it would not go for the next 3 years.
May I have a follow-up?
Sure enough.
Let's say I'm going to use poor Lauren Simpson as an example, so forgive me. She just joined the council last year in November. Let's say there was a mayor's vacancy in January, and let's say Lauren was chosen by the council to be the new mayor. Well, she still had most of her term to go, and yet in another year, she would be off the council entirely, if I understand you correctly, because she would have lost her position representing District 2 when elevated to the mayor, and the council would appoint someone else to District 2. I don't know. There's something about that it just doesn't feel right to me. It's not fair, I think, to Lauren, nor do I think it's fair to the people who elected both the mayor and Lauren, and now they're both gone.
It would seem to me that that's just one of the issues that are involved. How do you fill the mayor's vacancy?
Yeah.
You fill it from among the experienced people on the council, try to get the best fit. That person serves until the next election, and the resulting vacancy serves until the next election.
So my quick thought on this is that if that were to happen, using myself as an extremely hypothetical example, thank you, Nancy. At the end of the term, it would be my choice to run then for a real term in the mayor's seat that the voters would give me, or to potentially return to run again for the District 2 seat. I'm not forbidden from, or any hypothetical member. It could just as easily be John or David in District 4. So we could theoretically return to any seat that we would feel most called to serve in, correct?
Yes, I believe that's correct. Preston, you have a point?
So I'm just wondering if maybe, this item was specific to the council members for section 4.6. I wonder if we go ahead and adopt this recommendation and then we pose the question that Nancy's posing as additional topic for further feedback or research from the city staff.
I like that suggestion, Preston.
I like that.
Yeah, I like that suggestion. So, okay, so basically what will be recommended to the council is yes, go ahead with the issue extending from 30 to 45 days. And what we're referring to the city attorney's office is to take a look at the impacts of filling a mayor's vacancy and the resulting impacts on the council. Are you all set with that, Rachel? Okay. Okay,
Mark?
thanks, Preston, for bringing us to a conclusion on that, I think.
Mark, just a suggestion. I do think that what decisions we might or might not make on term limits could potentially also impact the research to be done on this issue. And so I think that also would need to be taken account of in the analysis.
Yes, obviously it would have an impact here, but I'm sure the attorney's office will take a look at that. And of course, at this point, we're only making recommendations rather than decisions, so there's going to be kind of alternate scenarios, I suppose, is what we might call them. And we can look at those in the next meeting. Okay. Okay, our next issue is the next one 8.2? Yes. And there's various ways of looking at this in my judgment. And the basic thing is to is the residency for the municipal judge, whether there should be a requirement that the judge be a resident of Arvada or not a resident. So the option one on this is just say, yep, obviously it's got to be an attorney licensed to practice in Colorado. Option 2, saying has to establish a residency within a given time. And option 3, just to be a resident of either Jefferson County or Adams County. And so I guess I'll just invite some comments on this issue, and we'll start with Katie Winter.
Thanks so much, Mark. I was wondering, can we start with, I have 3 basic questions when I look at all of these things. The history, what's the problem it's solving, and voter, propensity, voter attractiveness for having it pass. Why was this brought forward for the Charter Review Committee?
I'm not sure this was.
Oh, wait,
by the
can
council
you hear me now?
and
I just don't understand. Yeah, Rachel, do you want to speak to that? Like how this,
Yes.
how this came to be on a part of our things to review?
Yes, I apologize. I unmuted myself on Zoom and I didn't unmute my speaker. So I originally put this on the list, and part of the reason for that is that it encompasses both the presiding municipal court judge, but also relief court judges. So we've gotten to a point where we have a limited pool of people that we can choose from for all of those positions. And so it made some sense to at least talk about it and talk about whether the voters found enough value in having all of their judges be residents of the city, or if it was more important to voters for us to have a wider pool of applicants to pull from. So those are the 2 competing considerations in my mind.
Thank you.
Ken Feldman.
Yeah, I'm interested in Rachel's feedback on this because I have not, fortunately maybe, been involved with the Arvada Municipal Court recently. But, it seems to me that we ought to make a distinction between our chief judge and our part-time judges or replacement judges. I think it's important to have the presiding judge be an Arvada resident. I think we've always had that, and since we've had a full-time judge, and I think it's worked out okay. But the part-time judges or replacement judges are people who serve, from time to time periodically when we need them, when the judge is going on vacation. I would much rather, as big of a community as we are, and I'll open this up to all the lawyer jokes you want to make about how many lawyers we have. I would much rather have our municipal judge be able to draw from a pool throughout the entire metro area as to who the best replacement or part-time judges would be than to have somebody be forced to be a resident of Arvada. I've known a lot of municipal judges in my career, and many of them resided in communities that were not the community where they served as judges, and they've been great. A good judge is a good judge, and I think you can make the argument for a presiding judge to be local, but I'm not sure the part-time judges need to be. So I would rather split it and have the presiding judge need to be a resident, but not any of the other judges.
Yeah, and Ken, if this doesn't change, we're going to be coming to ask you next. You're going to be right up there on the bench. We're going to give you that black robe.
Yeah, but then I wouldn't be able to be involved in politics, and then my friends John Marriott and Lauren Simpson couldn't ask me for campaign contributions, and I wouldn't know what to do with the extra money. So it just wouldn't work out, Rachel.
Okay, Sharon Davis. And by the way, who is it? Barb, you let me know that my camera is off. No, that is not by intention. I tried to turn it back on and it said, sorry, it's been turned off by the host. And I believe that's you. So maybe you can fix it. Sharon, go ahead.
So I'm just wondering, I think this was one of Katie's questions too. What problem is this solving? I've worked for some small municipalities where the municipal judge did not live in the city, and as well as the any stunt doubles. and it worked out pretty well. So I'm just wondering, is this a colloquial thing? Is this something that we just feel comfortable with? And just my thoughts are we limiting ourselves when we say that you have to be an Arvada resident, or Jefferson and Adams is okay too, but if somebody is qualified, but they live in a different community, to uproot their family to come to Arvada for a finite period of time, I mean, sometimes maybe that makes sense to somebody, but to me it seems like we might be even limiting our pool to somebody who might be an outstanding judicial person.
Mhm.
Judge or guy, woman.
Okay.
So there's a couple of different, realms of thought on that in terms of why you would want to have a judge that's a resident. So there's a school of thought that says if you have someone at that level of the organization, you want them to have ownership and pride in the community. And so the idea is they would do a better job serving because they have that ownership and pride in the community. But, on the other side of that, again, it is the applicant issue. Are we pulling from a wide enough pool of applicants to get the most qualified candidate possible? When you live in the community, you're going to have neighbors appear before you. So you got to deal with some of those issues too, some of those potential conflicts issues.
Okay, Nancy Young.
Yes. I've spoken to a number of citizens, and it's their feeling that the city manager, the city attorney, and the municipal judge all need to be Arvada residents. They're the highest level executive staff in the city, and it makes them a lot more attuned to the citizens. And with the municipal judge in particular, because every city, town, and village in the country has sort of different protocols and different ways of approaching things, and that familiarity with the community makes them a better judge. That's kind of the point Rachel was making, but I do agree that we need to separate the presiding judge from the relief judges. I think that's a very important distinction with regard to this provision. Thank you.
Okay. Other comments? Well, there seems to be some sentiment by at least a few people to say separate the two positions. Presiding municipal judge, be a resident or become a resident within a given time of the city, and for the relief judges that there not be the same requirement. Shelley Cook.
I thank you, Mark. I agree with that. I could easily see the need for all of the council's appointees to live in the city. I think it's most important for the city manager. I frankly had not remembered that the city attorney isn't required to live in the city. Most have. But for those two, or at least for the city manager, it's really important, as Rachel said, for those people to be invested in the community. As Lorraine has said, for residents to be able to, see them at the grocery store and tug on their ear there and so forth. It seems like it's less important for the municipal judge. And one thought, rather than going to an Adams or Jefferson, one thought would be an Arvada zip code. I think we've done that once or twice to allow somebody who is just outside of our borders, but in many ways is still invested in the area and the community. So that's an idea. I support Ken's thought about releasing the subordinate judges, whatever they're called, but retaining that. Or if we decide to give way, that's an idea, is to allow for them to be in an Arvada zip code, for example. So thanks, Mark.
Okay, thank you, Shelley. Preston?
Just maybe question for clarification. So, and maybe specifically to Ken or others who commented. So if we were to modify on the three options that are proposed here, instead of it saying each judge, but for it to instead say the presiding judge, and then secondarily, the question being, would it be your recommendation or suggestion of one of those particular options over the other, say, for instance, option 2 that gives this time window for them, or if it need be at the time of their appointment or so on.
The reason we put the time window as a potential option is just to kind of marry it up with the residency requirement with the city manager, just so that it's kind of an odd thing to have the grace period there for the city manager, but not for the presiding municipal court judge. So I thought it made sense for them to match. But that's really the only reasoning behind that. So if we were going to keep it, it'd be a nice housekeeping thing just to make those two provisions match up in terms of how they require residency.
Okay, so where are we at this point? Are we, I guess, option 1, I guess we could do this again, Lisa, to take a look at option 1, 2, and 3, where...
Yep, I think Barb just put it in the chat box. I'll drop it again. I put the option names on there so you guys don't have to go back and forth. I'm evolving here with the polls, so thank you.
Okay.
And just Mark, I'm not sure, last time, we had a 20, we had 15. So I don't know if there's like a limit number that or like a minimum number we want to go with.
No, it's my intention that we'll report that to the council, just so they get a sense of what we are, rather than it being an up and down kind of vote to say, and only present one thing to them, but to say, this was the sentiment, 11 felt this way, and
okay.
9
so
felt
I'll keep the percentage and numbers and share it so you guys have that. Okay.
Yeah, that will be helpful.
Just so that we're clarifying for purposes of the vote, my understanding of the discussion is that if we went with something where we're keeping the residency requirement, like option 2, that we would be changing it to presiding municipal court judge as opposed to all judges, if I'm understanding the discussion right. I just want to make sure everybody's on the same page when we vote.
Thank you, Rachel. I was just about to ask that.
Okay, understood?
Could you repeat that? Sorry, I was dinking with my phone here.
Oh, no worries. So when we're looking at the various options that we're voting on, a lot of the discussion was talking about making a distinction between the presiding municipal court judge and the relief judges. And so instead of having the language in option 2 say all judges, we would change it, I assume, based on discussion to the presiding municipal court judge, and then go on to add that language about the grace period.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, so option 1, no residency requirement. Option 2, residency requirement for the presiding municipal judge, but not the relief judges.
So far we have 86% is judge needs to establish residency within 6 months, offer of extension for 6 months.
Okay, so that's pretty overwhelming for option 2. Okay, that's what we will report to council. Thank you. Okay, and we will move to the next section, which gets a little more complicated, I believe. The reference and the initiative and referendum procedures, the deadlines and signature requirements. And I'm going to turn this over to Rachel to introduce it and to kind of guide us through the discussion, if you will.
Yep, I can definitely do that. I'll also call on John and Lauren once I'm done, because I know that they have some perspective on this from the council meeting where we discussed it. So every city has this. Citizens have the constitutional right to what's called initiative and referendum. Initiative is where voters actually propose a new law, and that gets submitted to, or citizens propose a new law, it gets submitted to voters, gets voted on, and it can go be implemented as an ordinance. Referendum is the opposite of that. It's kind of a clawback of an existing ordinance or city law. So if there was something that council decided to vote on and put in place as an ordinance, citizens decided that they didn't want that in place, they could circulate a petition, get signatures, and end up getting it on a ballot so that citizens could vote on whether or not they wanted to keep that ordinance or law in place. So there are certain requirements for that. We're allowed to establish reasonable requirements for whether or not something gets on the ballot. And the thought process behind it is, you know, given what we have right here, or given what we have now, is we don't want it to be, we want it to be achievable, but we don't want it to be too easy, because if it's easy to get something into the charter or as an ordinance or to bring it back, we're kind of, we're undermining the role of the elected officials. So there's a balance there. We want to hit that right balance between not making it too difficult and not achieving the opposite thing either. So looking at those two options, what we're looking at now is the time and potentially also the signature requirements for a petition that would put an issue, an initiative, a referendum issue on the ballot. And I've got a chart down at the bottom of our little worksheet. Preston made a good point last time about how we count the number of signatures that are required, what that group is that we pull from and take that percentage from. So I updated the chart at the bottom in your latest packet with some additional information on exactly how those percentages are calculated, or what they're calculated from. So you can see how we compare to other jurisdictions. We're really pretty much in the middle in terms of the number of signatures that we require, but also the number of days. We don't have the shortest period of time for people to circulate a petition. We also don't have the largest number of signatures required for these petitions, but there are cities on both ends, so there are differing views on this. But that's kind of framing the issue up. We had listed kind of some of the pros and cons, and I know John and Lauren are going to talk a little bit about the pros. I just wanted to go through some of the cons and just outline those a little bit. So if we're making referendum easier, especially if it becomes substantially easier, we're creating a longer time period where we have some uncertainty about whether an ordinance that council votes on is actually going to be there permanently, because there's a longer period of time that are allowed to collect signatures and things like that. We also could potentially have increased costs if we have to send a bunch of things to the voters for to make a decision. Those can be incredibly expensive, especially if it's outside a time window when we would be able to put it on a ballot for a regular municipal election. You have the potential for some increased litigation. You can see this in Lakewood. When we do ordinances internally, we have a really collaborative process. We all sit down at a table, we get subject matter experts from a bunch of different places, and we look at these ordinances from many, many different perspectives. And we go through a whole lot of drafts before we get our final one in place. There's no real requirement for that collaborative process as part of an initiative procedure. And so that would be another issue that I would be a little bit concerned about, looking at the Lakewood ordinance, growth cap ordinance, and the amount of litigation that they've had on that. I think that's one of the things that a risk we might have. So yeah, I think I've run through that whole list. So John and Lauren, I'll hand it off to you to talk about some of the other issues.
I'll be happy to defer to Lauren if she wants to start this off, or if not, I'm happy to. I see Lauren. Yeah, go ahead, Lauren. You start it off.
What's funny, John, is I was actually going to defer to you to start it off. So my simple thought is that events of this past summer based off what I heard from people who were a part of it, were that they simply felt that the referendum was not possible for them. And as a council member, I feel like that referendum should be possible. If council messes up something so badly that such a significant portion of the city so vehemently disagrees, then it's really important that they have a mechanism available to them to correct us that they feel is attainable. And so I actually agree with lengthening the timeline. Now, this should not be an easy bar to clear. Let me be clear, because I think we all know that there are elements that sometimes get really worked up, this small group of highly active population, and that can put the city in a lot of headache if they just constantly keep bringing things to us. So it's really important that we make it a true test of the public sentiment and of the city. I just realized my video's off. I'm so sorry about that. So yeah, I feel like it's really important that we make it a true test of the real city sentiment. So my feeling is that we should lengthen the time to make it realistic, but not the signature threshold, simply because I want this to genuinely be a reflection of a significant portion of the city and not just something that a small minority is constantly putting us through, because that's a lot of cost associated. But if we were to lengthen the amount of time to match the current recall, which is 60 days, then I feel like the referendum would actually be a feasible alternative for the city. And if people were able to get the current signature requirements, then that would be a real referendum to put something to the voters. John, happy to hear your thoughts on this.
Could I just ask for clarification? So are you proposing that it be the time be extended to 60 days for both initiative and referendum, or was your statement that just for the referendum to be extended to 60 days?
For both.
For both. Okay, just wanted to clarify. Okay, go ahead, John.
So I just have a quick comment and then maybe lead us somewhere here. So I think my observation of this summer was similar to Lauren's. I think there's a misalignment in our charter between the recall provisions and the initiative and referendum parts, and they're all interrelated or can be interrelated. I think had they all been equally equal things to do any of the ones, I don't believe there would have been recalls this summer. I think there would have been a referendum most likely. But what I would suggest is, I know we have a couple of members of the public who would like to weigh in on this, but also we have in this panel, we have people who are incredible experts in this. I'm thinking about Mr. Fellman, who I believe was the mayor the last time this was changed. And I know that was a time of municipal politics where there was a lot of this going around. So I'm really interested to hear what he has to say. And I see Lorraine Anderson is on this as well. I'm also very interested to hear what she has to say. In her tenure on council, I know this was different than it is now. I believe since 2001, when this was changed, there has not been a successful initiative, referendum, or recall. And when I say successful, hadn't even been successfully gotten to the ballot. So anyway, I'd like to hear what everybody has to say, and I might have a comment at the end, but that's what I have.
Okay, I'm wondering at this point whether it's appropriate to get the input from our two people who've expressed that they want to make public comment. That would be Renee Nelson and Jonah Hearn. Renee, are you prepared to speak to this, your issue at this point?
Yes, Mr. McGough, I would appreciate that. Thank you. I am coming late to the game. I wasn't in a couple of the other Zoom meetings, but I appreciate the opportunity to be here this evening. I'd just like to cover the things. One of them would be either one or the other or a combination of, but extending the 30 days, I believe, would be helpful. And I wanted to refer back to some of the support and the comments in regard to the vacancy timeframe. When you see on your time schedules, the crunch that happens for you, and some of those things we're saying, soliciting to the public, getting things published, being able to advertise, just getting people in general to be able to feel that it's attainable. And then also it would allow for more diversity of the participation. So a lot of us, as you know, have full-time jobs or multiple jobs, and they want the opportunity to participate. And they want to know that, again, like Lauren Simpson said, that it's attainable. Most people seem to be spread so thin with their multiple calendar items and demands. They'd like to be able to know that they could actively participate and have some breathing room to make time for this important process. And then also, again, it's either a combination of either extending the days or changing those requirements. If you could do a percentage of the voters in the last election cycle, I believe we had that in the past, and it seems that these are more active people, and it seems to be part of a city sentiment for those that come out to the ballot box. So that's my 2 cents, and I appreciate the opportunity.
Okay, so you're saying you would support the extension of time to 60 days for all three, initiative,
Yes.
referendum, and recall, okay?
Yes, sir.
And Jonah Hearn?
Yeah, so I do want to voice my support for extending that to 60 days for all three processes. I do want to thank Lauren in her summary of her thoughts. I think were extremely accurate in the fact that, you know, a recall was definitely not the first choice. Having a viable option to essentially, in her words, if council gets it so wrong, having an option to be able to put together a referendum as a citizen group without having to fundraise tens of thousands of dollars to put a bunch of paid signature gatherers out on the streets of Arvada and create this whole, you know, I guess what I would say machine behind trying to essentially second guess a decision made by council. I would prefer to have a process that is more available to citizens and volunteers and people who are passionate about a topic to actually step forward, get educated, and go out there and talk with their fellow citizens and neighbors to get those signatures on a referendum versus a recall, which I know can get very personal. And as I stated during the council meeting on June 15th, this was not anything personal against any one person. This was what I felt the only way forward when unfortunately a decision was made that I felt and many of my other citizens felt were against the will of the people.
Okay, so again, you would agree with extending the deadlines to 60 days for all three processes?
Yes, and I would like to add just one thing is, and I just want to make sure that I do point out our city clerk did an admirable job of getting through a process that is not something that happens very often, if ever, in Arvada when it comes to kind of certifying signatures and reviewing the petitions. But the current process as it's written today is you submit by the deadline. On any of these processes, you submit by the deadline. The city clerk has, you know, frankly, a lot of time to review everything. And then once that decision's made, it's done, unless you hire an attorney, which once again is fundraising tens of thousands of dollars and then going through court case and suing the city and all that type of stuff. If there was just a 10-day, you know, dispute process at the end, like, hey, I'm throwing out all these signatures, and if you were able to essentially present some evidence that, no, this is a registered voter and this person signed an affidavit or, you know, presented themselves to City Hall to essentially attest to the fact that they are living in Arvada as a registered voter, and we kind of get that resolved. If there is a cure process, just 10 days afterwards, I think it would be a very healthy thing.
Okay, thank you. I think Nancy Young, did you have something to add on this point?
Mark, I have a lot to add on all of these points.
Well,
can you hear me?
Yeah, but the central question here is extending the time frame for all three processes to put them at 60 days. And so that's the primary.
Absolutely. I would extend the processes. I believe one of the commenters noted that there isn't a lot of time required. I've been through the initiative process, by the way, recently. So I can tell you the way it's written now, it's impossible. You've got to inform the citizens. Right there, you've got to raise funds. And people are having enough trouble, even back then, and it was far better economic times. It's very, very difficult to raise funds from a lot of people. Another reason is even if you get enough funds that you can have enough paid signature collectors out there, which I don't think is even possible given these requirements, it still takes a lot of time to cover a city as far-flung as this one. Even if you are able to get enough volunteers, you have all kinds of issues in being able to collect signatures within HOAs, for example. So, yes, definitely, I think the number of days should be extended.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Are there other comments on the extension of time? Well, maybe we can do something again. Well, and unless there's, Kim, I'm sorry, I didn't see your hand up there.
No, I just raised it, Mark. Thank you. I can't imagine there's not other people who want to comment here, but I have mixed feelings about some of these issues. I feel a lot more strongly about recall than I do about initiative and referendum. But just to give my perspective on this, I didn't grow up in Colorado. I grew up in a different state that had representative government without recall, without initiative, without referendum. You elected your local elected officials, and if you didn't like the way they voted, you got rid of them at the next election. And that being said, I'm just about 65 years old, and I've lived the majority of my life in Colorado. So I get it. I understand that this is a right that our citizens have under the state constitution, but I think it's a right that needs to be used very sparingly. And I'm more inclined to agree to extend the period of time for some of the good reasons that have been articulated here this evening for initiative and referendum, but not on recall. You know, some of the people have made good points about how many of us have other jobs and we're volunteers and it costs money to do this. And if you think back to the discussion we had just a few minutes ago about council compensation, we also talked about how council members are volunteers and how council members don't do this for the money, and how council members invest a tremendous amount of their own time, their personal time, their time away from their families, their time away from their businesses, and they are not adequately compensated no matter what we are going to pay them. And I hope most of us would agree with that. So to run for office and to raise that kind of money and to put that kind of investment of your own effort and your family's effort and your business's effort into serving your community in that way, and then having it be relatively easy to have to defend yourself in a recall election, to me, it ought to be really hard and the bar ought to be really high before we recall any of our elected officials, whether they are city council members or state representatives or state senators or governors. So I think, having listened to this discussion and trying to figure out what I feel the most strongly about and what I'm willing to fall on my sword for, I could agree to extend the time period to 60 days for initiative and referendum, but I would absolutely advocate strongly against making any changes to our recall criteria unless we're going to make it harder.
Okay. And I think that is the case at this point, Ken, that the recall would stay at 60 days and initiative and referendum would be increased from 30 to 60 days. So Vanessa Kendrick.
Shelley had her hand up first, if you want to allow Shelley to go first.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's all right. Go ahead, Vanessa.
I'm just looking for a little bit of context if we can. I'm looking at the chart and I'm noticing, okay, if we moved referendum to 60 days, then we are by and far much higher than the rest of the surrounding neighbors. Initiative, we would be sort of in the middle, moving that to 60 days. I'm interested to know, I see both sides of the argument. I see that, 30 days is such a short period of time. I'm interested to know, have initiatives and referendums been successful in the past, given the timeline as it is currently in the charter? And how often are these attempts made and how often are they successful? I'd like some history if anybody can share that's been around for a little while and can share some feedback on that.
If somebody who's been around for most of his 65 years might comment on that. If not, okay, let's go to Bob Dyer. Oh, no, I'm sorry, Shelley is next up.
That's all right, Mark. So I think, Mark, or in response to Vanessa's question, that John Marriott said that since this current threshold was adopted, we haven't had any initiatives. I haven't verified that, but that sounds correct. But I can tell you that prior to that, we did have a pretty tumultuous couple of decades, one or two in particular, when land use decisions were brought forward, when road issues were brought forward, and when efforts that would have really crippled the city in terms of its public improvements. So to me, I'm kind of in the school that Ken talked about, where you rely on your elected officials, and if you're unhappy with them, you've got a change every 2 years. You get a chance to vote the bums out, if you didn't like that. Whereas if you make it too easy to get things changed, they don't go through the process that Rachel talked about. I really feel like you want to be careful about this. It hasn't seemed broken to me recently. I will say that. It may be that I'm on a different side, values-wise or ideologically, from some of the issues. But even for those that I've disagreed with, just thought, well, that's the sort of thing that happens when you've got this sort of democratic role. But I would say I agree strongly with the idea of not budging on any of the recall requirements. So support that. If we are going to lengthen the days on initiative and referendum, I would offer and would entertain any thoughts about going to 45 days versus 60 on those guys. So thank you, Mark, for letting me weigh in there.
Okay. And Bob Dyer.
Yeah, well, I hate being one providing living history, but I remember there was a land use ordinance that there was an initiative, I believe it was somewhere around 97 that got to the ballot and failed. And then in 1991, there were two efforts. One was the elected mayor initiative that was brought to the ballot to change the charter. And then there was one that was to overturn, so I guess that would have been a referendum, overturn city funding expansion of the Arvada Center. That one failed. Obviously, the one for elected mayor passed. And my memory doesn't go back any further than that as far as anything successful. I don't know that there's ever been much more than the elected mayor passing. That's about all I can remember.
Okay.
So I'm familiar with, sorry, I apologize, Mark, for just jumping in here. The past 3 years, we did have one charter amendment amendment notice filed. It didn't get to the point, I don't think, where it was circulated for signatures. There were issues like with state law and stuff like that that just wouldn't allow it to move forward as the citizens who had proposed it wanted to. But other than that, in the past 3 years, I'm not familiar with any others that have come through. I did go out and try to ask the clerks for some of these other cities how many they had in the past 5 years. And I know Boulder sees a lot more initiative proposals than we do, likely because of that time period being a lot longer. And then Lakewood, I know, has more than we do as well. Their requirements are also a lot lower. So just something to think about in terms of history.
Okay, thank you. And Nancy Young.
Yes, Mark. About 6 years ago or so, I was part of a group on an initiative matter, and the 30 days was nowhere near enough to organize a crowd of volunteers to reach the entire city, to inform the citizens of the issue that we were proposing, and how that would affect them, let alone collect the signatures. We looked into paid signature collectors, and the cost of that was prohibitive. Even the fundraising we did would not begin to cover that, because also there are other little things in that process required by the city that further impede progress. And some of them are as small as requiring 1.5-inch margins on all pages for having the full text of the ballot issue on every single page. Prohibitions against anything other than speaking about anything other than what's on the page when you collect the signatures. So the hurdles with the current system are absolutely massive, and in fact, probably impossible. The only initiative that I am aware of is the one that my group put forth.
Okay, thank you. Brett?
Thank you, Mark. Personally, I found the use of the recall procedure against the city, the recent recall, abhorrent to employ that device for a policy decision. But that being said, I agree with the extension of time for the initiative and referendum requirements to 60 days. I think it just makes sense for everything that we've heard here. But I also think these bars are too low. It needs to be very difficult, and the reasons need to be very compelling to require something being added to the ballot that could create the chaos that Rachel pointed to. I'd like to see these bars raised to at least 20%, if not the same bar, 25% of the registered electors.
I would like to comment on that, please.
Okay, let me come back to you, Jonah. Sharon.
I'm enjoying this conversation, I must admit, but also I wanted to just throw out there that maybe this might be something that could be satisfactory as is, and we don't make any changes. I'm not here nor there, but I think it should be one of our options as well.
Okay, thank you. Yes, it is notable that we don't have that as an option, just leaving the language as is. And maybe perhaps when we do our polling, we can add that or consider that as an option.
I can add that, Mark.
Okay. Okay, thanks, Lisa. And Jonah, the intent of the public comment is not to enter into a lengthy discussion with you, but I certainly will grant you another opportunity to make a point.
I do appreciate that, given my involvement in so many of the comments that were made earlier. I do want to make a point that at the city level, we should strive to have the most democratic form of government that is possible. And anything that kind of works on kind of squelching the people's voices and allowing people to vote on a ballot about very specific, big time issues. I get the city council is elected as representatives to do the business of the city, and they absolutely have the power to do the business of the city. But I will just state one last time that when all of a sudden you have a transformational change that the city council that is before city council, I believe the precedence that Arvada has had of putting those things to the ballot and getting the true poll of the citizens, I think is the preference here, and really getting the opportunity where citizens can put something up or at least put a referendum to maybe put a check on the power of the city, I think is good, in the fact that it helps prevent a lot of the anger and animosity and other things that can happen, like recalls. To Brett's point, recalls should not be the solution. They should not be, but the way the current charter is written, it's the real honest solution. It's the only real way citizens can take action against something. So don't make it harder for citizens to be able to get their voices heard.
Okay, and let's go to, I think Bob Dyer was up next.
Thank you, Mark. One thing I'd like to add to what I had said earlier, the only thing I can remember being successful on the ballot was the elected mayor change initiative that was done to the charter. But as I recall, it was significantly different at that time as far as requirements. I don't remember exactly what they were. I think the timeline was longer, but I also think the number of signatures was less, and it was really hard to get those. So, and that's the only thing in 30 years that has happened as far as getting to the ballot and passing. I think that I know we're putting a lot of effort in thinking about this, but I think short of somebody with a lot of money or a corporation with a lot of money that could hire signature collectors, it's going to be difficult whether you make it 60 days or 45 days or significantly lower the percentage of signatures. But it's not an easy process. Speaking as somebody who has done it, and there are others here that have tried, it's not an easy process no matter how much time you have. Giving somebody a year, yeah, I suppose you could do it, but even 60 days would not be easy. So I know we're stressing over it, but it's not going to make a huge difference even if we change it to 60 days.
Okay, Mr. Marriott.
Thank you. So I'm going to make a couple comments. So I've also done initiative petitions in the city of Wheat Ridge, not in the city of Arvada, and it was exceedingly difficult. We rounded up a lot of volunteers, spent a lot of time. Then we rounded up as much money as we could and spent a lot of money and collected enough signatures. And then some of those signatures were disqualified. So we rounded up more money and collected enough more signatures to make it to the ballot. And then we were defeated on both measures. The voters, weighed in. So it's a really difficult process no matter what. I think here, what prompted my interest in bringing this to this committee was the misalignment currently between our recall requirements and our initiative and referendum requirements. And I see these three as really related. I think Mr. Hearn said it clearly. They would have used the referendum procedure had it not been harder than the recall procedure. Well, I think that's inverted. I think the recall procedure ought to be at minimum as hard as the referendum procedure, and maybe ought to be harder. And so I think that that's what my interest in getting this here was. I also think that it is important that citizens have some ability to address their government more than through just their elected officials. I know Mr. Fellman and Shelley Cook both said, hey, you know, the voters get to weigh in every 2 years. The problem just is some of the decisions we make on city council are final. You know, a development decision a year later at a city council election is probably no longer relevant because you can't take it away from that developer, particularly if they've built something there. So I think it's reasonable to have a procedure that can immediately address what the public may see as a decision by council that they disagree with. And, you know, when I look at all these possibilities, we have, you know, a short time frame and a large number of signatures to get. I don't, you know, the combination there is what's important, whether it's number of signatures or time to gather them in. But I don't see I don't see it being a healthy situation for us to have relatively a very large number of signatures to get and a short time to get it in. You know, some other places, Thornton is an exception, but some other places you collect a percentage of the citizens who voted in the last gubernatorial election or the last mayoral election. Here, we're asking anybody to avail themselves of this procedure to get 10% of the registered voters, which is just a bigger number. And so, you know, to me, I look at it and I think my main comments would be, I don't think the recall should be easier than initiative and referendum. I think it should be the other way around, if not equal. And it doesn't matter, you know, I think it needs to be a fair process, an attainable process, but not an easy process. And whether that's achieved by a longer time frame or a lower signature threshold or some combination, I think that's the appropriate way to go about it. And I think our history it shows us, probably from what we've heard tonight, probably the right answer here. You know, Mr. Dyer brings forth that, you know, in 30 years, there's been one citizen initiative that has been successfully launched, gotten to the ballot and passed by the voters, 1 out of 30 years. I don't know how many others have been launched, signatures collected, made it to the ballot and failed, but I know since 1991, there has been none that have been launched, signatures collected and made it to the ballot. And so to me, that shows 20 years in which either the councils have really, you know, done an outstanding job, which I believe they have, or it also shows that maybe the procedure leans a little bit on the side of unattainable. And so I would strongly encourage us to just shift this back a little bit and keep it in keeping in mind that we don't want to continue to have the recall procedure be the easier path. So that's my comments.
Okay, and Katie Winter.
Thanks so much, Mark. I was wondering, Lorraine Anderson, did you have a public comment on this, or were you going to speak to this? I could have sworn you were before I say one more word. Did you have her down, Mark, for public comment on this issue?
No, I did not.
Okay, great. I just wanted to make sure I gave her the floor before I said something. You know, I'm a huge proponent of one person, one vote. And I too, like Ken, am from a foreign land called New York, and we, for better or for worse, elected official, and you get them, and then your chance to elect them out is what you do. And in Colorado, there is so much power and privilege to both our elected officials and the people. We vote a lot, and it is expensive. And it takes a lot of time, effort, and energy to participate in elections. And recalls are possible, and recalls have happened locally when you have a critical mass of people who believe that their governing body has done something wrong. The people can bring recalls to the ballot, and recalls can be successful. Not saying it's the right thing to do. I'm not saying I endorse that policy or procedure, but this is Colorado's lay of the land, and I embrace where I live today. I think that all these points are really relevant and valid, but I think that the number one goal I'm hearing is to have our elected officials in Arvada get it right and serve the community well as a body of 7 and have diverse representation. And I really think that we can come to some conversations here, because I dislike I dislike it when I see these things come up in our community outside of the voting process. It does not create goodwill. It is timely. It's time consuming. It's costly. And I think of all the dollars that could have gone in other productive ways in 501c3s and in our community. So it's not cheap to run an election. And I'm just going to end it at that. Thanks for the time to say something.
Okay, thank you. Okay, and Nancy, I'm going to give you what I think will be the last well, no, Shelley just put her hand up. So let's get these two comments and see if we can bring this to a resolution. So Nancy?
Okay. Thank you, Mark. As John Marriott pointed out, there is a connection between the percentage of what and the time to gather the signatures. As someone who attempted to gather signatures, 10% of the registered voters, there were at the time 85,000 registered voters. That's 8,500 signatures. 25% of the people who voted in the last election, and I'm going to simplify this because I have the world's worst math. I'm going to call it 40,000. 25% of voters, of 40,000 voters, is 10,000. And so I think John Marriott made a very good point. What I would like to see, and I think they ought to be equal processes. Having been through an initiative process, I know just how incredibly difficult it is. I would like to see everything based off of the number of votes cast in the most recent mayoral election. And if we want recall to be 30% of that, you know, or 25% of that number for all three processes, I would be fine. They're still huge numbers. And frankly, in a way, the initiative process, I feel, should be perhaps a little bit easier. The reason being, an initiative is not challenging an existing law. An initiative is creating a new law. But I do think that in whatever case, it ought to be based on the percent of people who voted. Thank you.
And Shelley?
Yeah, I just wanted to respond to the comment that we hadn't had anything but the directly elected mayor. I think you want to think also about the hazard you create if you lower the standard too much. And I'll just give the example of the one for 72nd. 72nd was really contested. I mean, it's such a controversial issue for many years that what finally happened is, I think it was an initiative, but maybe Ken or Lorraine would remember, brought to the ballot that would have required the city to turn over any publicly owned right-of-way within 300 feet of a park, an existing park. That right-of-way would have had to be, or any publicly owned land, would have had to been folded into that park. So it actually polled well at the outset. People liked the idea of that. Why not expand parks? You have this land laying around that's not being used. But what that would have endangered was not just West 72nd, the extension from Pierce to Kipling, but also West 86th Parkway, the 2 lanes that have been added adjacent to Stanley Lake Park, the turn lanes that just got put in at the Arvada Center at 68th Avenue, Oak Street that serves Skyline Ridge up there, the subdivision. And it was by virtue of the fact that it would have also endangered, it would have removed the ability of Village Homes to build 5 parks, Village of 5 parks. It's only by virtue of that fact that we had the money to fight that. It took a lot of money to persuade people. You know, it was kind of a complicated issue. It would possibly, even probably, from what the pollsters thought, have passed had not that, you know, that unique circumstance have been in place. So I think you got to think not just about whether any have passed, but whether any might likely pass, if you've lowered the threshold too much. So anyway, I just wanted to add that. Lorraine sent me a text and says she does want to comment, or I don't know if that came through as a chat, but anyway, wanted to highlight that.
Okay, Lorraine, I'm going to let you have the last word on this. And all I have is silence.
So
Hey,
she's still
hey,
muted.
Mark. Lorraine may be having technical difficulties getting in, and I certainly would not want to speak for Lorraine, but she did send me an email, and I'd be happy to read that as a comment from her if you want that, or if I don't know how to ask Lorraine if she would want it, but I'd hate to see Lorraine's voice be unheard here.
Yes, actually, I think it's more appropriate that you read the email since Lorraine did not sign up for public comment. So I think it's, if you want to enter that into our discussion, I think that's appropriate.
Okay, sounds good. So here's the email Lorraine sent to me. Said it should be easier to recall a crooked city council member than change, and I'm assuming she's meaning change a law or an ordinance. So that's Lorraine's comment. And Lorraine, if you can hear me, if I'm misspeaking, please let me know, and I will be more than happy to recall that. And if you can technologically get in and make comment, you're welcome to do that too.
It appears that she can't unmute herself.
Okay, well, I propose that we move to a resolution of this particular question. If we can put up the slide with the three options and then add the fourth one that we discussed.
All right, so I put it in the chat, the link for the poll for you, and then I added those options.
Okay, and let's make it option 4.
Option 4.
To that there be no change.
Okay, we have keep as is, and then Shelley and a couple of people had mentioned the 45-day middle ground. So just putting that as an idea feeler out there too.
No, at this point, I think we just need to take a look at the options here. And once we get to that point, let's see what this feeling is and see then whether we might change. But we've got 4 options to take a look at. One,
all right.
revise.
Okay, I put the
we'll come back to more than.
Mark, I put the 45 days, so I can edit it and do a one without the 45 days. Right now it's on there and people are voting on it. So do you want me to remove it and just do another one?
Well, we've got what I'm reading here is option 1 is to something more than 30 days. And option 2 being to extend the deadline for revise the language to extend the deadline for signature gathering. Option 3 only to lower the signature requirement. And a fourth option is just leave as is.
Okay.
So can I ask for clarification? Because on the poll, it says the first option isn't just to lower the, or to increase the time, but also to lower the threshold below 10%. So Mark, are we voting on that and saying it's like you recounted?
Right, no, the option 1 is revise the language to extend the deadline to something more than 30 days and lower the signature requirement to a number below 10%. So we haven't specified what that number greater than 30 days would be, but it's the first option is just going to something more than 30 days.
Okay, so for right now, I'm seeing 31. This is actually a close one. 31% is extending so option 2. 31% for option 2, and 25% leaving as is. Being the lead, extending to 45 days. 25% extend deadline to more than 30 days and lower signature at 12%, and then just lower signature requirement at 6%. So.
Can you give those back to me again for? I
Well,
got that.
looks like some people didn't vote, so I don't know, like, should we thumbs up if we did, or?
Mark, this is Ed. Can I make a suggestion, which is just do a first vote the way you had it laid out. And it seems to me that based on the preliminary results, everybody's leaning toward extending the deadline, then do a second poll on 60 days versus 45 days.
Right, that's kind of the way I was looking at.
Yeah.
The option one is something more than 30 days, but we don't.
Well, number one decreases the number of signatures, which
okay,
adds the wrinkle into it. So I think if you look at the existing results, people are leaning toward extending the time frame, but there's a split between 60 and 45 days.
All right, so if Mark, give me the suggestions that you want me to put as a poll, and I'll resend a link.
okay.
I'm having, so option one, correct me if I'm wrong, anyone. So option one, more than 30 days and lower signature. Option two, extend deadline to 60 days. Am I right? No, extend, just generally extend deadline.
Right.
Yep. And then option three is lower signature.
Yes.
Okay. And then four is leave as is.
Yes.
And then last is extend to 45 days the timeline. No, leave that off.
Yeah, leave that off, and we can come back to that as far as the time. But so at the start, we're just saying to extend the deadline.
Yeah, and then we can do a poll on the number of days separately if
Right.
that's what it seems like people are leaning towards.
Yes, I think that's the right direction.
Okay, so referendum. Got it. Sorry, I'm creating as is, guys. Bear with me.
Okay, well, you're doing a great job.
Trying. All right, I will get that. Hold, please. All right. X more than 30 days, lower 10, like working as is. Extend signature deadline and lower signature.
Yes.
Random. Got it.
Okay.
All right, pasting it here, guys. Sorry. All right, good to go. Vote.
Okay.
I appreciate the Ed's comment of hurting gerbils.
You left out the fourth option of leave as is.
Guys.
All right. Because have you added that? Because I submitted, but I would say leave as is if I had the chance to do it over again.
Okay, so you got that on there now, Lisa?
Hold, please.
Lisa, you've been amazing. Thank you for doing the poll tonight.
All right. 30 days. All right. We got option one, 30 days and lower, below 10%. Second is extend deadline. Third is lower signature and leave as is. I'm on it. All right. Hold, please. Copying link. Submit. All right, guys. It's on the chat box.
And Mark, Nancy has her hand up.
All right. Numbers are showing. We have 47% for extend deadline. Leave as is secondary with 29%, 24% as 30 days and lower below 10%.
Okay, I think what we should report back to council is the first two of those.
Okay.
Which is, would you say them again, just with the percentages, with 49% and 27%?
Sure. Final call is 44% extend deadline, 33% leave as is.
Okay.
Are we going to have a separate vote on the 45 versus 60?
Yes.
Oh,
And
good.
So since most of those, the most votes were to extend the time, so then it becomes, should it be 45 days or 60 days? So if you can just put that on the polling, Lisa, that would be helpful.
Gotcha, Mark. It is on there on the chat for timeline, 30 days, 45 days, and 60 days.
Well, we've already voted for the extension, haven't we, from that it would be extended. So it becomes an extension of either 45 or 60. So we don't need the 30.
All right, so everyone vote 45 or 60.
45 or 60.
Yes, and we would like to budget for some I voted stickers.
I like that.
All right, so reporting in so far, we have 53% to 60, 47% to 45.
Hey, again, I think those are close enough that we just simply report those back to council, that was the sense of the committee, and they can put what value they wish on it, but to let them know that we're fairly evenly split on the whether it should be 45 or 60. So I think that will do it. And I just noticed on my clock here that we're at 7:52 or 53, so we're very close to the end, and I suspect there might not be enough time to deal with another issue this evening. And the next issue that would have been up is appointment of council. And I think perhaps we'll leave that till the next meeting, unless somebody really thinks we can get through it in the next 5 minutes. Okay, hearing nobody suggest that we can, in fact, discuss that fully in 5 minutes. I'll just ask if there are any other comments as we bring this meeting to a close. It would mean, of course, that our next meeting will be on March 11, at which time perhaps we'll be able to finish up, and if not, we'll go to March 25. So there will be one more meeting for sure, and perhaps two. Is there anybody who wishes to say anything? Oh, I see Nancy. I see your hand up there now. Go ahead.
Okay. I'm a bit disappointed in the discussion on the last item, and that is that there was a lot of discussion about equalizing the recall initiative and referendum items. But the only aspect of that we really addressed directly, because that's how you put it, was the extension of the number of days. There was very little discussion about the number of signatures and on what is that percentage based. There was one comment that said it should be raised for initiative and referendum. There were other comments that said, that the signature requirement should be different. I really feel that this discussion as a whole was not fully adequate to make a recommendation to council. I mean, I really appreciate all you've done and the work that poor Lisa did to get all those polls out. But I still feel like that particular item is yet unfinished because we only addressed one aspect of it.
And so how would you phrase the issue that you would want to be considered further?
The issue that I would like to see considered further is whether the percentage be based on the number of registered voters, or should it be based on the number of people who voted?
And
The two are vastly different in terms of the
Understand that, but
number
there's
of
also-
signatures.
There's also quite a difference in the, it would seem, in the import of recall being based on the number of voters, since that was the basis upon which somebody was put into office. Whereas initiative and referendum really have a different base than the number of voters in a particular election. So, but it's something that, again, I'll just turn over to the city attorney's office, and perhaps she can bring something back to us. Ken Feldman.
It'd be nice to have a table of numbers of how many signatures would be required for each process.
Ken Feldman, and we've got to move quickly. We've got just a couple of minutes left.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. I agree with Nancy that there's lots of different ways you can talk about how you might modify this, and that we didn't talk about all of them. And if we're going to talk about them at a future meeting, I would also like to talk further about whether we decrease the number of days for recall. If we're going to increase the number of days for initiative or referendum, we really haven't talked about should we decrease the number of days for recall. So if we're going to talk about all of the different ways that we can address changes, I would like to talk about that one as well.
Okay, and Preston, you've got the last word.
So Nancy, I maybe just am trying to understand your concern. If I am understanding generally your position, I'm sorry, if I'm generally understanding your position, you would like to see some of these requirements reduced. By the math that I thought you had presented earlier, I think you had indicated that the 10% of registered electors would actually have been a lower number than the 25% of those voting. And so I'm not quite sure if I'm quite understanding what would you see as the benefit of that further topic.
The benefit, as I see it, is that the people who vote are those who are engaged in the community. I also see it as the fact that this process for initiative and referendum, I'm one of the few people that have even attempted it in the last 20 or 30 years, I believe it was. Bob Dyer said only one has succeeded, and there's only one that I'm aware of that actually gathered signatures. The process as it stands now is just about impossible. Now, maybe a discussion amongst, if we could see the numbers, because maybe my math is not so good, we could begin to get a notion of the cost and extent of the effort of citizens who are working, citizens who have children, have many distractions. It is not just difficult. I'm all for difficult, but the process now is impossible.
Okay.
Nancy, can I get a little, sorry, I just want to make sure I'm coming back with the right numbers next time. So Nancy, you want to see all those numbers, the different variations for Arvada, right? Because I think it would be hard for us to, well, we could get comparative numbers for other jurisdictions, but I think that we should probably limit it to Arvada if we're going to look at those signature requirements. Or is that okay with you?
Rachel, I'd like to make your job easy. We have a table now, and we have information from other jurisdictions on percentages.
Yep.
With regard to the table, it would be useful to see what number of signatures with the 25% for recall based on the last mayoral election, what would the number of signatures have been? And then for the initiative and the recall, based on the current number of registered voters. Because the number I used was off the top of my head and it's years old.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, we have come to our time. So let's just plan that we will meet again at 6 p.m. on the evening of March 11, at which point we'll have several issues from the city attorney, as well as the follow-up to the issues that we talked about tonight, the numbers, for example, that Rachel just referred to. So again, I thank everybody for all of your assistance, and special thanks to Lisa for taking on the task of conducting our voting, and Lauren Simpson, I think you're the person who should get the I voted stickers for each of us. Okay. Oh, Princeton, have you got something yet? Okay, you're good. Okay. Thank you, and good evening.
Have a good night,
Good
everyone.
night, all.
Thanks,
Good night,
Thanks, Mark.
everybody. Bye-bye.